Today we're continuing our journey through the book of 1 Corinthians, walking with them, kind of peeking over their shoulders and learning what it is that God is teaching them, but also teaching us. Kind of that big picture. He's teaching them that, hey, you're better together. You're better walking in unity in the everyday walk of life. So as we look at that theme today, as we look at that, just wanted to read from chapter 1, verse 18. Paul is telling the Corinthians, "For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. And I, when I came to you, brothers, did not come to you proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom. For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. In my speech, my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Go big or go home is most likely a statement that you've heard from somebody that's trying to make a big splash at something. They're trying to do something big, or they expect something big to happen, and so they say, go big or go home. You know, when it comes to expectations, we say that same thing. Go big or go home. Let's just make some big expectations. And I'm all for big expectations. Sometimes my expectations get too big. We all do that. We all set expectations that end up getting to be too big. On ourselves, on other people, on other organizations, or on organizations, on food, on movies, on books, you name it, we have placed an expectation on it. We are really good at placing expectations on other people. Matter of fact, we're so good at expectations, we often put expectations on God. That we expect God to act in a certain way on our behalf, and puts us at the center of those expectations. And when our world comes crashing down, when those expectations aren't met, they come crashing down on the top of us. If we put ourselves and our expectations on ourselves, they come crashing down on us, or they come crashing down on whatever it is that we've set that expectation on, and it crushes us. It crushes them. It crushes the object, the thing that we're placing that expectation on. And what it does is it further drives a division, a dissatisfaction in between us and another person, us and that organization, us and God. When we take part in this, holding on to our expectations of life circumstances, we often miss the power of God. A.W. Tozer said it this way: "The reason why many are still troubled, still seeking, still making little forward progress, is because they haven't yet come to the end of themselves. We're still trying to give orders and interfering with God's work within us. We haven't come to the place yet in our life when we have these big expectations. We haven't come to the place in our life where we are willing to surrender our expectations to God's work, to God's power. You know, we're looking today at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through the first couple of verses of chapter 2, and my hope is that when we get to the end of this, when we look at this and think about it and look for ways to apply it into our life, that we will be able to answer the question, is there room in my life, in my everyday walk of life, for the power of God? Or am I holding on to those expectations in my life that I've set that are way too big and are placed in the wrong direction? Is there room in my life, in my everyday walk of life, for the power of God? As I mentioned, we've been looking at the Corinthians. We're looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 1 this morning, and we're looking at this church that's attempting to be a church. And I have to give it to them. They're attempting to be a church. You know, we say they're misguided. We say that they are doing it the wrong way. But you look, and they're attempting it. They're immature in the way they're carrying it about and being this church. But they are trying to be the church. They have this relationship with Paul, and they're trying to act out that relationship the best they can understand. They're a young group of believers that are just come together, and they might not understand all of the ins and outs and the intricacies of what it means to walk with Jesus, but yet they're making that effort. You might say they're doing more harm than good, and you're probably absolutely right. They're probably doing some pretty decent harm in their neighborhoods. They're expecting things to happen on their own power and not working based upon God's power. But this gives an opportunity for God to work in their lives. To say, you know, it's not about getting human results, it's about getting God results. And this gives Paul an opportunity to point that out to them. And in this section here, Paul lays this theological groundwork for what will guide them towards unity, what will drive them to doing God's work together. And as I've mentioned before, this letter is written to a group of believers in Corinth 2,000 years ago. And there's a lot of juicy gossip that we can look at and say, just kind of shake our heads and wag our finger at them and say, you know, they're doing it all wrong. Or we can look over the shoulder of the Corinthian believers and into this text and say, what is it that Paul is trying to get them to understand? So that we can understand that as well. So we can learn right there alongside the Corinthian believers. That as Paul in this section here tries to get them to see that the power of God actually overturns their expectations, that we would learn that same thing from Paul.